Well, good day, imagination connoisseurs, and welcome to another Road Trippin' with RMB podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bodden, and you're listening to our podcast for Wednesday, June 1st, 2022. We're glad you're here. As you know, Rob and I chat every weekday when he's on the road from his house to the studio where he records with John Campea and the Campea crew. And they make all those wonderful YouTube shows that I keep telling you need to watch and pay attention to, which actually yesterday's show was hilarious, by the way. You should definitely watch. But today, Rob's not on the road. In fact, Rob is going to be recording a Campea show from the ROADTRIPPIN. So we had a chance to chat, and Rob didn't have to pay attention to traffic, and I didn't pay attention to the time, and so we ended up with an hour and 20-minute long episode. While I apologize for that, there's perfectly good reasons for it. Today's episode is really interesting. We talk a little bit about a special guest that Rob may be having join him this weekend for Robservations, and the animated show or animated movie that he will be presenting over in Europe next week at a very important animation festival. We'll also talk a little bit about the recent social media backlash to the Obi-Wan series, and why is it that some fans think they can behave in and exhibit their outrage in ways that are, quite frankly, racist and inappropriate, and how do we deal with that inside the post-geek singularity? But by far, the most charming and delightful piece of today's episode is the 40 minutes we spend reviewing mail from listeners. We got 4 letters in just yesterday. We go through all of them, and it's really great. There's some great letters, some great observations, and we have a chance to talk about things we haven't talked about in a long time. I think you're going to enjoy it, especially if you're getting a little weary with the Star Wars and Star Trek conversations, which I know some of you are. I think you're going to enjoy today's show. But, like all shows, they all start the same way, and that's with that annoying dial tone. But, hey, it's a phone-in conversation with Rob, so that's what you're going to get, and it's going to sound like this.
Well, good morning, Mike. A little different this morning. I am not on the Campea show this morning. I'm at home recording a mailbag for him because we have this lunch thing that we're going to, so we're killing 2 birds with 1 stone.
Killing 2 birds with 1 stone. That's terrific. So you road tripped to the Robservatory. It was a short trip.
I road tripped to the Robservatory, which is really coming together nicely.
That's great. If folks had a chance to watch your Midnight Musings stream from Saturday, they kind of get a little bit of a picture of what's going on in at least one corner of the Robservatory. But I know you have much bigger plans, don't you? Yes.
So there's stuff going around 365 degrees around me. So, and I'm going to pull back the desk a little more so it's closer to the background that you could see. Now the background is totally enveloped, and many more things are up on the shelves.
Wow. Well, that sounds good. Your little tour that you gave of the Robservatory when you were first moving into it and still had things kind of in boxes and the place, looked like a half moved into apartment. But fans loved it, man. They loved to see what you're doing and what you're working on and where things are going to go and what you're going to do with that little spare room off to the side and all kinds of stuff. I'm sure that when you feel comfortable doing it, we would love to have another kind of backstage tour of what you're working on.
It's definitely coming shortly, probably in the next week, sometime next week or 2.
That's great. Well, and I know that you had RM on the show actually in the Robservatory a week or 2 ago, so you will have space apparently for guests. Isn't that right?
Yes. And I think I might have a big guest this weekend.
Oh, really?
Perhaps. Yes. My friend Michael Davis, who directed the movie Shoot 'Em Up with Clive Owen. He also discovered Kerry Russell in his first feature, 8 Days a Week.
Wow.
He has spent the better part of a decade hand animating his new feature film. Called Nixed. And it is about Richard Nixon's attempt to solve the Kennedy assassination. And and it's having its world premiere at of the most prestigious animated film festival in the world in 2 weeks.
Wow. No kidding.
And it's called, I want to say, I believe it's called the Annecy International Animation Film Festival.
Wow.
And it happens in France.
Mm-hmm.
And so the Annecy Film Festival began in the 60s.
Uh-huh.
And it was the creation of SICA, the economic dimension of the event and arrival of the international animation film market in the 80s. The festival's flourishing years in the 2000s with the creation of SIDA to reach its 50 years of existence as a mature festival. And it's going to, I think it's, I don't know much more about it, but it is the world's most prestigious animated film festival, and Nixed is having its world premiere there in 2 weeks, I think.
Well, that is awesome, and you think you might have a chance to engage him in a little dialogue this weekend, huh?
Yeah, he's going to come out here.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting, and he's been working on this for so long. It's funny. Shoot 'em Up, which came out in 2008, was the last film that he made, and he spent a number of years trying to get things off the ground. Came really close, and 3 or 4 years, 5 years of that, he just got sick of it because he came so close to things and they didn't happen. And he was a storyboard artist first, and he used new software that existed and came up with this cockamamie story and wrote it and directed it.
Well, that's very cool. In fact, there's a lot of storyboard artists that seem to be kind of taking advantage of technology to start doing more and more animation. So I know there's a number of animated shows or animated shorts that you can watch, I know, on YouTube and Vimeo and a couple of other streaming services that are drawn by either commercial graphic artists or storyboard artists who then use software to help animate that. I think Simon's Cat is one of those, actually, which is a fun little, mini tune kind of thing to watch. You brought up an interesting point, though. This prestigious animation festival is in France, and that reminds me of some of the work of some of my friends who are in the comics business, and how they've always looked at European markets, and especially France, Belgium, and many of those markets as having a much more sophisticated approach to comics and to animation than most of the American marketplace. And I think in much the same way where you see the popularity of anime and manga, in Japan, and how that isn't the same kind of graphic novels and same kind of animation as we would have here in the States. The Europeans really take their animation and their comics very seriously, don't they?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think because it's an art form,
right?
The one thing that I think about that's unfortunate about the United States is art, and the appreciation of art, I think, has really been diminished in our culture. I mean, it still exists in the cities.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and there are a lot of places around the United States that you wouldn't think have great museums, but some of the great museums are, in cities other than New York or Los Angeles or Chicago. And, I think that I always joke, I say Europeans have been human beings a lot longer than Americans have. So, they just have an appreciation. I mean, again, we talked a couple weeks ago about the making of meaning, how we have to give meaning to our own lives. And I think a society also has to give meaning to itself. Mm-hmm. And what are the reasons for human beings to be alive on this planet? And one of those things is to reflect back and make sense of life itself. Mm-hmm. And sentient beings. And part of that is to be able to be contemplative of your existence. And that's really a lot of what art, anything that we create, any kind of story, the basis of storytelling is to reflect back and gain insight into what it means to be human.
Right.
And what do we do in this finite period of time? I mean, we're self-aware, and you look at a sunset and you feel something. Mm-hmm. You have an emotional response to beauty. And that, where does that come from? Why do we have that? And that's what makes us, uniquely human. And I think that one of the things that in America, we sort of downplay those things because you have to imbue art with importance and meaning on a cultural and social level for it. Otherwise, it's just a distraction. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things I'm seeing in American culture is people have put themselves at the center. I mean, there's so much creativity going on in social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever, but so much of it is navel gazing. It's looking back at yourself. And it's not looking, although there's still a lot of people that are looking at the greater truths. But I think that now we're going through a period of time where people didn't have this technology to look back at themselves. So there's a lot of that going on because the masses can do that. In a way, you don't want to downplay something like Twitter because it's an art form that's been embraced by the everyman. And when you're carrying around technology in your pocket, isn't it interesting that things like TikTok are making reels, how even though TikTok is a complete scam by the Chinese government to do all kinds of data mining. But so what? I mean, at the end of the day, let them do their data mining. But
which by the way, your TikTok we dropped yesterday already has like 40,000 views. So thank you, China.
Yeah, well, I mean, what they're doing, there's a really great YouTube video about this. It's pretty insidious.
Right.
And, whatever. I mean, the good with the bad, right?
Yeah, that's right. There's always two sides to every coin. So,
yep.
Just ask Harvey Dent.
It's true.
But I think your point is well taken in that, and maybe it has something to do with the fact that this country isn't very old yet, and the American culture is, or the culture at least in the United States, is somewhat unique. I mean, there are other countries that are made up primarily of immigrant bodies that have come together, but in the U.S., given the size and the power of the economy and everything else that goes along, we have a pretty unusual pedigree in that there is nothing that's distinctly, uniquely American. You can argue that the Native American culture is distinctly American, but if the more you look into that, you realize that is also an amalgam of a number of different nations and cultures and traditions and things as well. So, the history of our country and the fact that there are so many diverse cultures that have come in and kind of mixed together or not mixed in some cases and just have collided with each other is part of what can lead to great creativity, but it can also lead to great some really nasty behavior. And we've seen some of that recently, of course, over the last 8 to 10 years, both in terms of the leadership that we look to for cultural leadership and direction and vision and foresight, but also in our entertainment, which is what you and I like to talk about mostly. But when we take a look at things, getting back to the point, when we take a look at things like how the Europeans, for example, look at graphic arts and look at comics and look at that medium, they have a different approach, and part of it I think is probably they didn't have the comics code to deal with in the 1950s. They didn't have some of the social backlash that you saw in reaction to some of those amazing science fiction and horror titles of the late 40s that gave rise to the comics code. You didn't have some of the absolute shenanigans, whether it's the Red Scare or some of these other things that kind of helped shape pop culture either through intimidation or nurture. And so you end up with artists in Europe creating some really amazing stuff, whether it's Geiger and his kind of wild illustrations, or Mobius, or comics like Tintin, or the Leaning Girl series, or some of those others that are just amazing pieces of art and storytelling, and not what we would normally consider to be comic books. Is that wrong?
Right. Yep.
So anyway, I'm excited. I hope that you're able to get your friend to come in and do an interview. I think that you have a unique ability to go ahead and draw some really interesting things out of people, Rob. That should be fun. So let us know.
I've known Michael we met actually in the early 90s at Full Moon Entertainment when he directed his first feature, this kids movie Beanstalk. And then one of the last, before I did Star Trek, the last feature film that I did the special features for was Shoot 'Em Up for New Line back in 2008, 2009.
Cool. And what's Michael's last name again?
That was a lot of fun.
Yep. And I'm sorry, what was Michael's last name again?
Michael Davis.
Davis. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to it. If you're able to lock him in, let us know so we can go ahead and promote it on the Post Geek Singularity website and on social media. That would be fun.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Hey, so talking about the Post Geek Singularity website, I've noticed that people are talking an awful lot about kind of the controversy stirring around the Obi-Wan Kenobi series and some of the fan reaction to the selection or the casting of the cast member who is playing Reva or whatever. I mean, I don't know how closely you've been following all that, Rob, but I'd be curious to hear what you think about all of that. I actually made a pretty lengthy post on one of the threads on the PGS Facebook page talking about the necessity for people to really kind of pull things back a little bit and remain civil with one another and not get quite so controversial and so hard towards one another. But I'd be curious to hear what your take is on that whole situation, seeing how you're following the series and have some interesting points of view on all of this.
Well, first of all, obviously, racism has never gone away. And I think that there's a couple of things going on. Obviously, we are living in a time where there is a lot of interest in making sure that many groups of people that have been marginalized for whatever reason over the years have opportunities that they didn't have before, or have more opportunity. And me, I'm all for that. I think the more voices that we hear from, the more artists of all persuasions, whether they're people of color, whether they're LGBTQ, whatever group you want that has been marginalized, we always benefit when we get more artists creating and are able to illuminate their own experience in whatever way they choose to do so. I think we're all richer for it. So I as you know, Mike, I mean, the whole philosophy of the post-geek singularity is that every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And I think that there are great stories to be had everywhere. So I've been a fan of different kinds of voices being brought to the fore so we can hear them for the first time. I think it's great. Then we're also having to deal with the fact that I think that now there is an overcompensation also happening where in people's desire to even the playing field, you know, they're specifically looking, like, I know in Hollywood, it's a lot harder for me to get jobs because people want to hire, you know, middle-aged white dudes are not at the top of the hiring pool anymore because now it's become a thing to want to hire more women, more people of color, more people LGBTQ, and I'm actually fine with that. I mean, on one hand, you know, people like myself have had a lot of opportunity, you know, over the past centuries. So that doesn't bother me as much as the fact that it's unfortunate that suddenly, you know, I've never believed that you can move forward by replacing one oppression with another, no matter who it is. And also, I have to eat.
Right.
So, you know, in that sense, you know, I still want to be able to get hired myself. But and I do think that it's an admirable effort on a lot of people's part to do these things. But then what happens is, you know, they're doing things like, I think in terms of fandom, when they do things like race swapping characters that have previously been established, I can see how some people can find that to be pandering in a certain way. And it does smack of that a lot of the time when you see this overcompensation happening. Now, I personally don't care. I want the best person for the job. I want the best actor. And Moses Ingram, who is playing the third sister, the Inquisitor, she's a fantastic actress. You know, we saw her in The Tragedy of Macbeth. She was in The Queen's Gambit. She played Anya Taylor-Joy's friend that was in the girls' home that they lived in together. She's a fantastic actress. So in my mind, it's like, makes sense to me. Beautiful woman, fantastic actress. You know, she looks great dressed as an Inquisitor. But I think, unfortunately, what happened in her case was, obviously, she's in a very high-profile Star Wars, maybe the highest profile Disney Plus Star Wars series. And in the first episode, mostly the second episode, she was not given an opportunity to bring to the fore her acting abilities to the point where I think, and by the way, I don't think that was her fault. I think that was the script, and I think it was the way she was probably directed. And she was finding her character.
Right.
So she didn't exactly endear herself to the fan base immediately. And so then people are looking for reasons why, and then of course you get the insidious, I mean, straight up racism coming out. On one hand, there are people that are bitching about the fact that there is, I think, there is a little bit of they're recognizing, whether you want to call it equity, whatever you want to call it, there is a bit of that going on. There is a bit of overcompensation amongst the powers that be to offer more representation than we've had in the past, which is natural. You know, in the wake of what happened with George Floyd, in the wake of, you know, the rise of things like critical race theory and everybody being asked to reassess their positions on race, which I don't think is a bad thing. You know, I think that any position anybody has should always be open to scrutiny. You know, I once heard somebody say, you should never necessarily think that you know everything about your beliefs. Because if you think you know everything about your beliefs, you're not open to inquiry into those beliefs.
Right.
And I believe that you should always never fear inquiry into what you believe in. You should always leave, your beliefs should always be not immutable.
Yeah.
You should always be able to reassess and redefine based on new information. Otherwise, what's life all about, man?
Right.
As we get older, we gain wisdom. So I think that's, as I said earlier, we were talking about the point of life. So, I do see that there's a lot of people that can recognize this kind of they see it more as pandering, and they see it more as tokenism and all that. And I understand where they're coming from. And that the fact that her character, the third sister, was not exactly her performance. Even John Campea and I talked about on the John Campea show, villains in the Star Wars universe should be having a little bit more fun, meaning it's fun for the audience to watch them.
Right.
And I would say that her performance in the first or the second episode, especially of Obi-Wan, was rather dour. And when you're watching the Grand Inquisitor chewing the scenery and Sun Kang chewing the scenery, I would have hoped that the third sister would do a little bit of that as well. A little larger-than-life fantasy villain action. But it was very sort of serious, and it wasn't as fun as I guess people would have wanted it to be. So then, as a result of that, she received an unnecessary and completely ridiculous backlash, and against a lot of the more racist elements in fandom that do exist, really went after her. Because fandom could be, there's obviously a big element of fandom that is immature and reactionary.
Right.
And I would say I really thought that her part was greatly improved in episode 3, and I had a lot more fun with her character in the third episode because she was given more to do.
Yeah.
And so I think by the end, we're halfway through the show. Maybe by episode 6, she'll wind up being a fan favorite. But yeah, it was interesting how Disney felt the need to they've released a couple of defenses against this kind of thing, and they're also saying, people don't be a racist. But again, it was interesting because on one hand, that is attacking a fan base. You're accusing your own fans of being racist, but if the shoe fits, which it does, the truth can sometimes hurt. But it was interesting to see Disney take a stand, and then of course Ewan McGregor came out and released a statement, and Anson Mount, Captain Pike himself from Star Trek.
I saw that.
He came out, and I think, look,
I thought that was pretty cool, actually.
It was cool, and I think really, as you know, Mike,
well, I know you like Anson Mount.
Has any place in modern society.
Yeah.
It denigrates. It denigrates the very essence of what our fandoms are about.
Right.
And I think that it's unbecoming of everyone. And we're better than that. But on the other hand, I do understand from a fandom perspective, there are a lot of people that are calling out pandering behavior.
Right.
And I think that at the end of the day, if this entertainment was great, I don't think anybody would have a problem with it. But I do get the feeling, I certainly see it in Star Trek, that a lot of our great franchise entertainments are deeply compromised because the people that are making these franchise entertainments are putting messaging before they're putting their message before their characters and their story.
Right.
And they've said as much.
Well, that's certainly the case for Star Trek, yeah.
Yeah, especially Star Trek.
Yeah.
And it's like, first of all, who are you? What qualifications do you have to send messages to your audience? Your messaging should be baked into your great stories.
Right.
But the thing is, their storytelling is compromised by their desire to provide some message to the fan base. And my question is, why the very entertainments that you're creating already appeal to people that are on your side with that messaging?
Right.
Especially Star Trek.
Right.
But the problem is, when you tell shitty stories that are derivative and you're borrowing from other writers and you're shamelessly unoriginal, and then at the same time you want to tell us how to live our lives, it becomes increasingly frustrating because these creators should spend more time on the actual stories they're telling and less time on their own desire to come off as socially conscious.
Right. So
tell me a story, man. Because if you're telling us bad stories, you're doing us a disservice, not just as fans, but as part of the culture.
Right.
You're damaging culture to make yourselves feel better about your messaging or whatever it is you think you have to say. And I think that's what a lot of our fan base is tired of. And some people are very reactionary about it, and I don't blame them.
Mm-hmm. Although I will say this, like all conflicts, there's blood on everyone's hand, right? So,
yeah.
And what I saw was sort of interesting this morning as I was taking a look at the situation that had been kind of cooking overnight on the Post Geek Singularity Facebook page is that it's one thing to kind of hold a standard of, we want to have quality storytelling and we want to make sure we have good performances. But I saw an awful lot of dismissiveness about the concern expressed specifically by Moses Ingram and by the people who were rallying around her, meaning Disney and Ewan McGregor and that kind of thing. And that there were comments that every business is just interested in just checking the boxes today, and that they they don't really care about hiring on merit anymore and things like that. And there's these kind of broad brush strokes aimed at everybody, and that she's overreacting to people criticizing her acting and things like that. When in fact, several of the messages she received were either threatening or really just out and out, flat out racist, meaning judgments based on nothing more than her ethnicity. And a lot of that was being dismissed as, well, it's the internet. That's just how things are, and people flame each other. And I got to tell you, man, it's like, you may not like the story, and you may not think much of the person's performance, but that does not give you the right to be a racist asshole. And it does not give you the right to flame somebody by telling them they shouldn't live anymore, or that they shouldn't be around, or they should be forgotten forever. There is a point where, as a fan, you can overstep. And I think that now we didn't have those kind of comments necessarily being made in our community. Thank goodness. I think everyone knows that we don't tolerate that kind of nonsense. But for some reason, people think that they can do that. And I just relayed my personal experience, having been, this is ridiculous, Rob, having been the mayor of a small city of 450 people that 3 years ago decided to go ahead and tell bicyclists that they couldn't cut across city-owned property and ride through a neighborhood. Instead, they needed to stay on the bike trail and ride an extra 800 feet to connect to the next bike trail. I'm still getting messages on social media from people I don't even know, who I'm sure don't live anywhere near this community. But people are messaging me, telling me that I shouldn't live anymore and that I shouldn't be around and that I'm a horrible human being and all that kind of thing. Now, I don't let that bother me, but it is concerning when people are making outrageous comments about how you shouldn't be living anymore, that they'll be glad when you die, or those kinds of things. I mean, that's ridiculous. And that is what the anonymity of social media can provide to people in terms of allowing them to behave in ways that, there's no way. It's like, you just want to say to them, it's like, do you kiss your mother with that mouth? Holy smokes. I mean, look at what you're saying. Look at the way that you're treating other people. That's not really acceptable human behavior by any stretch of the imagination. And, it's sad to see people who perform for a living, who try to entertain for a living, having to take that kind of abuse from people they don't know and who think that they're way more important than, or try to validate themselves by tearing down the performance of these artists. It's just outrageous.
Well, again, yeah, I mean, I think it's sad because we all lead lives of quiet desperation. And I think that our this great communications technology that we have, that you can reach out and seek out and talk to so many people. There are many people in the world that, feel that their lives aren't what they want them to be, and they dream of someplace better. But one of the ways that they're able to express themselves is by getting access to people and expressing their anger.
Yeah.
And they feel, I think they feel they get something out of it.
Right.
And I think, life, Mike, as you know, life is hard.
Yeah.
And there's not a lot of sack. That's why, unless you have the skill to give your own life meaning through your own pursuits for their own sake, there is a lot of anger that people have because they feel powerless and marginalized, and their dreams have been shattered repeatedly because they never learned that they have the ability to change. I mean, you look at people like Anthony Robbins, or go back to the 70s, things like Est. There's always been these weird self-help, well, not weird, but self-help groups where people have said, here's how you can take control of your life. I mean, that's been around for thousands of years, and it's manifested itself in many forms because people don't have control over their own lives. They're slaves to food and family and paying rent and barely scraping by.
Right.
And our civilization, unfortunately, I mean, one of the things that I think that the Europeans and Asian cultures do have over us is that there is a respect for the arts. Mm-hmm. That doesn't necessarily exist in America and our capitalist society, because there isn't. I mean, obviously, when people become wealthy, they can become patrons of the arts. But the masses, when you're trying to afford rent and afford food to put on the table for your family, what time do you have to go to the museum and appreciate a 500-year-old painting?
Right.
Why should you do that? And I would counter and say, well, how can you not do that? Because that is what makes you realize, as you are struggling to put food on the table, that life has meaning beyond the daily struggle of existence. And perhaps, and that's something, again, it has to be taught, like civics and civility. Why should we respect the United States government? Why should we respect being in a democracy? Well, if you don't ever know, you're never going to respect it.
Right.
And
right.
I think that's the thing where we, in America, we have fallen down. You are seeing the divisions in this country because it is satisfying to hate somebody.
Right.
It's satisfying to look outside yourself and go, fuck that guy. I hate that guy. I hate the Dems, the libtards. Yeah. I hate Trump. I hate the gun lobby, whatever. I mean, on all sides, hate is easy. It's, as they say in Star Wars, it's easier. It's more seductive.
Right.
And that's where we're at now, because you have to choose to give your life meaning beyond your knee-jerk animal brain satisfaction of hating something.
Right.
And I think that's what, great art is all about. And so, one of the things I've always thought about, obviously we've talked in the past about biologically being wired to be adverse to people that look different than you, because back to our lizard brains, if you're out on the African veldt and you're searching for water, a billion years ago, if you find a tribe that doesn't look like you, fuck them.
Yeah.
It's biologically hardwired into us, I think, to look at people that are different in whatever way, shape, or form.
Right.
And even if they're wearing, the people that wear funny clothes, why are you wearing, you go, like Pippi Longstocking in the mountains of Scandinavia? What are those clothes? What are you wearing? You freaks? We look at something that is outside of our realm of experience, and you immediately have you're either suspect, you're you're revolted, or you just think it's weird.
Right. Well, unfamiliarity is dangerous, right? I mean, things you don't know well, can you trust it? That's how you end up picking up a landmine, not knowing it, and blowing yourself to smithereens. It's like a mistake can be terminal.
And there are sociological, and there are ethical, and there are physical landmines.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
And I get it. I understand that. And immediately you think about like the transatlantic slave trade. We brought over Europeans, traded with Africans who were selling their own brethren, and they're into slavery. Mm-hmm. And we brought them over here. And so you immediately had an entire class of human being that was looked down upon simply because of where they were from.
Right. Well, they were viewed not even as human.
Right. I mean, they were from, it's so interesting to me that they didn't know as much about it as we know now, but the very birthplace of humanity, mm-hmm. You would think, and you look back into like Egyptian history and things like that, you would think that anybody from the African continent would be exalted as like they're the first humans. Without them, there would be none of us. And that all of us are offshoots. And we're different, but that the true humans are people from Africa, and we're all just distant cousins.
Right. Well,
it was never put that way. It was never. And imagine if it was. Imagine if, but because again we're culturalists, and it's like, well, you don't have Renaissance painters here in Africa. Yeah, but we built the pyramids, motherfucker. Whatever. It's like the Sphinx is still here. Point to me a 2,000 or 4,000 year old oil painting.
Well, they've got those cave paintings in Spain or something, right? So
that's true.
I guess you've got that
on canvas, Mike.
That's true. That's true.
Those on rocks. Anyone can paint on a rock.
That's a medium issue. Well, that's a whole nother conversation. And talking about conversations.
You know what McLuhan said.
That's right. The medium is the message. Exactly. So talking about messages, Rob, we have 4 letters we've received just yesterday from folks after we posted our podcast. So
really?
Yeah, I know, it's tremendous. It is an embarrassment of riches, and thank you so much to the Imagination Connoisseurs who sent in letters. But let me go ahead and read those, I know, because we are quickly approaching our time limit here, and I want to make sure that we have a chance to yammer on about some of this stuff because it's pretty fun. But the first one,
bring it on. Whoa.
Absolutely. The first letter is a follow-up letter, actually, from our friend Paul Cognier, who is our Australian storyboard artist, who sent in the first letter that we read.
Wow. Okay.
Just yesterday. He says, Thanks, Mike and Rob, for a wonderful chat discussing the what-if question I posed where if you remember, he asked what would happen if Star Wars were purchased by HBO rather than Disney. He said, I look forward to tuning into more of your chats in the coming weeks. Cheers, Paul Cognier. And Paul, thank you, I think. That was a great first ever letter, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, a really, really fascinating conversation we got out of that as well. And really a great thought experiment to contemplate what might have been.
Well, I thought it was tremendous because it honestly took us somewhere I didn't think we'd go, and we arrived at a conclusion that yielded not only a highly explosive headline that's generated lots of interest and lots of downloads of the podcast, but I mean, I think it really took that whole conversation in a whole nother direction when you take a look at where does Star Wars actually line up with the Disney brand and the core values that we've all come to know and understand over the last 100 years? I mean, that was just a great question, Paul, and thank you very much for sending it in.
100%.
Yep. Next letter is from Jared Snyder, and this is another one of these questions, Rob. We could probably do a whole, just go on and on about this, but let me go ahead and touch on it, and we'll talk about it today, and I'm sure that at some point when we're talking, we're going to want to revisit this. His question is, why IP? He goes, Dear Rob and Mike, now I'm not requesting prostate advice from Dr. Rob, but a question.
That's good, because I have none to give.
That's right. So,
other than occasional stimulation.
That's right. So his why IP question is not like a rhetorical excretion issue. It is truly, he's asking about intellectual property. He goes, I want to talk about 2 streaming shows, Foundation and The Man Who Fell to Earth. Both purchased a somewhat famous IP to nominally base their show on. Isaac Asimov's Foundation is a huge, sprawling series he started in 1942, made his last contribution in 1981. Walter Tevis wrote The Man Who Fell to Earth in 1963, and David Bowie starred in the critically acclaimed 1976 movie adaptation directed by Nicholas Rogue. Neither is what you would call a quote-unquote hot property. Both series retained very little of the plot material and swapped races, genders, and rules of many of the central characters. Now, I'm not here to critique either show, but neither show is remotely true to the source material, so why'd they purchase the rights? The plagiarism of Dorothy Fontana by Kurtzman and Sycophant Hideout demonstrate they have no regard for anyone's material, so why pay for The Man Who Fell to Earth? While I'm not as familiar with the Foundation's showrunners, I don't understand why they didn't just call their show The Institution. Do financiers require an existing IP? Do producers purchase rights cynically intending to use the barest of the plot points? Wouldn't someone question paying for rights in these circumstances? It all seems kind of game being played, like a game being played on creative people to further denigrate their creations. They can't expect the fans of the books would engage, would they? Thanks for taking the time to read all of this. Solidarity in the singularity. Yours, Jared Snyder. Well, what do you think?
I mean, first of all, I think Jared's correct, and I think what we were talking about earlier, that The Man Who Fell to Earth is a great example of Alex Kurtzman and Jenny Lumet, who created that show. It's actually a sequel to Walter Tevis's novel and the movie directed by Nicholas Rogue. Bill Nye plays an older David Bowie, the character from the movie. And so for those of you who don't know about The Man Who Fell to Earth, it's basically about an alien played by David Bowie who comes from a planet that's suffering from a horrible drought and has come to Earth to set up a situation where he can hopefully create industry and use their own technology and create patents and sell things, become rich so he can do what he needs to do to get help for his home planet while here on Earth. And it's really compelling. The movie's very interesting. The book's really good. But what they wanted to do with a sequel show, I think the reason that they picked it was because it was a really easy vehicle to make more of that messaging commentary.
Right.
About immigration and race and all of these other things. And so that's why they picked it. And so the reason that IPs are so attractive now is because it's less risky than something that has no precedent. So if you're going to spend a ton of money doing a TV show or a movie, you are, according to the bean counters, even though I don't necessarily agree with this, that you are better off by doing something that already has a name rather than having to create, and which to me is so bizarre because no one ever got rich in Hollywood following a trend.
Right.
You get rich in Hollywood by setting trends or reading trends and servicing those trends correctly. But, you know, it's interesting to me because The Man Who Fell to Earth is a product of its time. And now what these people are trying to do, I mean, you look at things like, well, The Foundation, like you said, The Foundation is a very sprawling story that's very difficult to distill into a television format. And in doing so, they only took the most basic elements of it, rejiggered them, and turned them into an episodic show. Now, I liked Foundation as an interesting, it used Foundation as a jumping off point, but it was kind of its own thing using the concepts and some of the characters. Did I think it was a great adaptation of Foundation? No. But it was handsomely produced. They spent a lot of money on it. It was really lavish. And I found it interesting for what it was. Right. But I was able to approach it and knowing it's not a slavish recreation of Foundation. But the question that I would still have is like our listener does, is that why do it? Why not create something new? I mean, but having the Foundation and going and acquiring the rights, you can then say from Isaac Asimov's celebrated Foundation series. So it gives you something that's saleable and people can. It's funny to me because no one in the fucking audience even remembers who Isaac Asimov is.
Yeah.
Now I know some of you out there know his work, but if I were to ask you about, say, okay, Asimov, tell me about the Elijah Bailey novels.
Yeah.
By Jupiter or The Naked Sun or anything like that, or his laws of robotics. Could you tell them to me?
Is it bad, probably, Rob, that in my head what I envision is that when they pitched this idea for Foundation, they said, yeah, this is based on the books by Isaac Asimov, and someone in the meeting from the studio went like, oh yeah, no, I love that guy. He wrote I, Robot. I love that movie.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's exactly right. I mean, and so it's funny to me that, like, The Man Who Fell to Earth, I mean, somebody, first of all, I'll tell you, by going after The Man Who Fell to Earth, it's twofold. On one hand, I'm sure that was born out of looking for an IP.
Right.
Let's look for an IP we can revive and make it relevant for today's audiences. That's exactly what happened. And then they found it, they're like, yeah, man, David Bowie and Nicholas Rogue. I mean, this was a cool science fiction movie. I bet they didn't even like it that much, but they might have. I mean, who knows? But that's exactly where that came out of. And yeah, we can make it more relevant because we can talk about, I mean, they're aliens, but we can talk about immigration and all of this. And the one thing about The Man Who Fell to Earth that I always thought was so great about the story is this poor alien becomes corrupted by Earth. Mm-hmm. Humanity destroys him, essentially. And it's a cautionary tale. And so they and it's a cautionary tale about anybody that has dreams and then they get corrupted by wealth and life, and and even an alien it can happen to him too. and that's what's really, really fascinating about the story. There's a lot more to it than that, but and I'm sure that's what happened. But then they decide, oh, this is something we can now use for our messaging, but we can also say it's a previously existing IP.
Well, and I think you bring up a good and important distinction as far as the value of being able to present this idea to whoever you're pitching it to and tie it back to a previously existing IP, whether the people that you're pitching it to actually know anything about that IP or not. Because this complaint that Jared has been expressing about how can you claim to be a certain kind of story and then like completely ignore what actually happened in the story is a common complaint of historians about historical dramas. So, which is like one of my favorite things. Like, Caroline and I are watching the last season of the Last Empire, of the Last Kingdom right now, and it's highly entertaining, but not necessarily historically accurate.
Sure.
But they take the setting, they take some of the characters, they sort of make the characters do some things, they create some contrivances, they need a heavy, 21st century audiences are used to seeing certain kind of villainous behavior happening inside one person and not necessarily the way it was done, 1400 years ago or whatever. So it's interesting. We've really, really enjoyed it. It's a fun series, and but I wouldn't ever be playing it for a medieval studies class as curriculum, So, but I don't think popular audiences necessarily care. They just want a good story. They want to be entertained.
Yeah.
That may not really be all that bad, quite honestly.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, great letter from Jared. Thank you very much, Jared. We appreciate it. We've got two more here. Let me go ahead and read the next one. This is from Ben Robinson, who wants to know if we're turning into our grandfathers, Rob. Hi, Rob and Mike. My name is Ben, and I'm a teacher from the UK. I noticed in one of your recent discussions that Rob was lamenting that kids don't know how to watch movies and that attention spans seem to be dropping off. I think that's right, but I wanted to reassure you that we do still try and encourage a critical and inquiring mindset in our students here. The good news is that many of them are smart and engaged. I just think that the quality of the entertainment they're being served up is inferior to that which I and you were used to when we were kids. I love movies, he says. I love literature too. When I got divorced a couple of years ago, I made sure that my book collection, just dog-eared paperbacks mostly, came with me. I have a new relationship now, by the way, and life is good. I listen to lots of discussions about genre film on YouTube, but I realize I really don't go to the movies very much at all anymore. I will be going to see Top Gun Maverick and dragging my new girlfriend along to it because I'm excited to see a proper story that treats its IP with a bit of respect. It's crazy that this is such a rare thing today. I liked the original, but it's not what I would call a favorite film. That I'm excited to see the sequel, I think, says more about a dearth of much else worth watching. The last film I went out to watch was Dune last year. So my question for you is this. Are we just turning into our grandfathers? I can well remember my own grandfather complaining when my dad took me to see The Empire Strikes Back when I was 8 or 9. My grandfather thought that all modern movies were rubbish. He was wrong about Empire, so it could possibly be that we are equally wrong about Terminator Dark Fate or Ghostbusters Answer the Call and all the rest of that stuff I haven't bothered to watch over the last few years. Has the culture moved on and we just can't relate to it? Is the fact I didn't bother to watch them myself indicative of something else going on in pop culture? I knew all about them without having to actually go to the cinema. I'm sure in the past I was more willing to take a chance on something I wasn't sure about. One last unrelated question. What's your opinion on The Big Lebowski? I think the Coens are a bit embarrassed that this is their film that has the biggest following, but it remains my favorite film of all time, so I don't think they should be. Great comedies don't get the credit they deserve sometimes. Thanks for listening, and I hope you both have a good day. Ben Robinson. So thank you, Ben. And we will have a great day, but first things first, Rob, got any thoughts on The Big Lebowski? Dude.
Well, yeah, you know what I think the appeal of The Big Lebowski is. First of all, I think it's a really fun movie, but I think everybody knows a dude. Maybe not exactly like the dude, but they know people like him.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think the dude is a uniquely American kind of a character that we all know. And there's something about he's a friend of ours that we love, despite he's very iconoclastic and set in his ways or whatever. We all kind of get it. And I think that there's, like all great stories, there is a truth in The Big Lebowski about the dude that either we personally identify with or we know somebody who does.
I met the guy who the dude was based on.
Yeah.
So I actually was on a panel discussion with him, and he's very much like like the dude. Although he's also a political activist, and that's where we kind of bonded. But I completely agree with you. I think that one of the things that makes comedy funny is that through the surprises that happen to the characters, the damage they suffer, or the ridiculous embarrassment that occurs to them, we all recognize a common truth in all of that. And I think that the Coen Brothers did it miraculously with that film. I love Coen Brothers movies anyway, just because I think that they have a great ability to to construct these elaborate stories that are both really serious and delivering great messages, but also, to my sensibility anyway, they're hysterically funny.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Coen Brothers, they have a singular voice.
Right.
Well, I guess a dual voice, but that is so unique to them. I mean, they can work in any genre, and they haven't made a science fiction movie, Although I don't know if they really would, but I mean, some of my favorite movies, their gangster movie Miller's Crossing is a favorite of mine. No Country for Old Men, is a masterpiece. I love their blood-soaked noir, Blood Simple. Mm-hmm. I love Inside Llewyn Davis, their movie about basically an Arlo Guthrie-esque figure in New York in the 60s, early 60s. I mean, they're so diverse in their voice. Hail Caesar, I thought was funny.
Oh, I thought that was hilarious. I'm all in on
brother,
that.
Where art thou?
I was just going to say, first off, the music in that was amazing, but I'm all for anyone who wants to retell, the Iliad and the Odyssey is set in 1930s America. I think that is a fabulous. That's a great film. But so we're talking about all these great films. Have we become our grandfathers? Do we think? Are we? To Ben's point here. I mean, are our standards set at an impossible level where we just judge everything else that's coming out now as rubbish, or how do we respond to Ben's question?
Well, no, I mean, I think, look, every generation changes, grows, and evolves. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that we're in the middle of a transitional period in terms of how people have learned to live in society. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it has to do with the amount of information that's available to us. And the fact that for the first time, people can now curate information that they take in. Mm-hmm. And, it used to be like my mom used to tell the story about how in the second grade she had to tell me to shut up at dinner because I would come home and I would have to relate every single thing that I learned at school that day because I was so excited about everything that I learned. But it had to have been the most mind-numbing thing for my parents because they too learned it in the second grade, mm-hmm. and they'd known it for the better part of their lives, and they had to listen to their son talk about it like it was the greatest thing ever, and it was on a nightly basis. And, but the difference is now, I think people are only interested in learning the things that they know and care about. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're going through a period of time, that's not true of all people, but we're going through a period of time where people only want to take in what they want to take in.
Right.
And they're curating knowledge. And in doing so, they're robbing themselves of knowledge they don't even know that it's a joy to possess.
I would completely agree with that. And, I would take a slightly different look on it. I heard someone say, I don't know, a year or two ago, they were on a radio program and they said, there just aren't any Renaissance men anymore. And that was not speaking specifically about men, but just about people. There aren't people with that mindset of a Renaissance man. And the idea of a Renaissance man was it was someone who had a thirst for knowledge and needed and wanted to know everything so that they could take all of that knowledge and develop a more complete view of the world. By knowing a little bit of everything, you were able to contextualize all of that information and create and distill something that was truly unique and truly interesting. And I think that there is, I agree with your statement in that people mostly just want to learn more about the things that they already think they know all about anyway. And I guess maybe to Ben's point here about, have we become our grandfathers? I would add one more thing on top of what you've said here, Rob, and that is that for many of us, many of our benchmarks of what we love and what we think are good are things that were impressed upon us when we were kids and teenagers, when our brains were developing, and we were easily impressed and influenced by media, whether it was Star Wars or Star Trek the Motion Picture or the original series or Alien or whatever, comic books we were reading. We were impressed by that, and a positive impression was made because we had nothing to compare it to. But then for the rest of our lives, we are comparing the exposures that we have to ideas and to media and to literature and to music, to those things that impressed us early on. And there's a standard now. And there's a way to be able to, you have an evaluation standard. So you're able to decide whether or not you think that new thing is better than the old thing. But the old thing is amazingly good because it was compared to absolutely nothing. It's an almost impossibly high standard to try to exceed the rapture experience of the early exposure. And so what you end up with is I do think the older you get, the less open most people are to taking a look at new ideas or new art or new whatever and accepting it as being better than what they had back in the day. So I think that's kind of a human nature situation, and it's certainly, if you're aware of it, you can deal with it, but I think a lot of people are just very secure and kind of living in their own past that way. I don't know, what do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a really good point. I mean, it's I never would have imagined when I sat in a theater 45 years ago and saw Star Wars that we would be 45 years here later and I would be watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi TV show.
Right.
And I mean, I was literally there when the world was introduced to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it's bizarre that 45 years later, people are still looking or hoping to find the same satisfaction that I received as a 10-year-old watching Star Wars 45 years ago.
It's the same thing about the franchise you and I both really adore with Star Trek. Remember, after the original series came out, it's like it was canceled after 3 seasons. So we thought that's all we were ever going to get. And it was amazing that we got an animated cartoon. I never thought the animated cartoon was all that great because I'm not big on that filmation animation style. But the whole fact that even occurred, I mean, that was rapturous, and that was completely unexpected and a crazy thing, because up to that point, all you were getting on your Saturday morning cartoons were, reruns of Bugs Bunny cartoons from the 1940s and 50s, and Heckle and Jekyll and Tom and Jerry and crappy two-dimensional, Hanna-Barbera cartoons. So when Star Trek: The Motion Picture finally came out, holy smokes, that was amazing. We never thought we'd get that again. And then the fact that they were able to do a couple movies, and the entire backlash around TNG when it first came out, that it wasn't real Star Trek because it didn't have the original cast. I mean, it's people don't recall just kind of the pushback on all of that, and how this kind of inappropriate or unfair standards, get set when you're young, and nothing ever seems to be able to measure up unless you can reopen your mind and accept it. So I don't know. Just
but also there's something else in that the Obi-Wan Kenobi character up until 2005 was only ever utilized by the creator of the franchise.
Right.
So now, like with all of these franchises, the problem I've had with Star Trek since 2009 is, even with Rick Berman's tenure as the producer, he did 25 seasons of Star Trek over 18 years. He still originally worked with Gene Roddenberry.
Right, exactly.
So there was a bit of Roddenberry himself in the DNA and all of Star Trek. Well, now, when these creators come in and want to keep, first of all, I think it's pretty ridiculous to expect a 45-year-old franchise to continually deliver what it delivered 45 years ago.
Right. That's unfair. I would agree.
And especially because it's owned by a company that needs it to deliver a certain thing.
Right.
And even the story, it's so funny because, like we talked about a couple days ago, they're telling these stories about wartime, and yet they have to make wartime palatable for kids.
Yeah.
And so, like, it's so funny. The latest episode of Obi-Wan Kenobi, he straight up, like, murders a bunch of stormtroopers as he's carrying young Princess Leia, who is now his charge. And he just straight up murders stormtroopers. And they're just people.
Right.
That have co-opted. They were taken probably as kids or whatever, and he kills like 20 of them. And it's funny but they do it in such a way where it's palatable.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it's kind of insidious. It's okay because it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's okay because it's stormtroopers, so he can just kill a bunch of motherfuckers. Like, they didn't ask. It's not. They're just at work. The stormtroopers they're just like, here, we're guarding this planet, we're looking out, and here comes this Jedi that's being hunted, and these poor dudes that run across him, they all die.
Right.
And do they deserve that? We don't think about that kind of thing, but it was like, these guys the stormtroopers are just functionaries. They're space janitors with guns.
Right. Well, yeah, although I don't think it's fair to just, that's not a problem just with Star Wars. I mean, don't you think Batman's got a body count?
I'm not being glib, but it's, you know what I mean? It's like, so it's okay when Kenobi just straight up kills a bunch of dudes.
Right.
And that's fine. I have no problem with it, really, but it's like you're asking, then Disney, they want to have their cake and eat it too. Then they want to tell stories that aren't that dark. It's so weird because I think that since Disney acquired Star Wars, it definitely, and even Lucas to a certain extent, because he thought that when he was making the prequels that he was making for little kids, and indeed, maybe that was true. I mean, he certainly thought it was, but I mean, the show's called Star Wars.
Right.
In Star Wars, they blow up a planet, kill billions of people.
Right, exactly.
Darth Vader is choking people to death. He kills a rebel with his bare hands. If this is a council ship, where's the ambassador? As he tosses away a dead body that he's just crushed the windpipe of.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that, the real problem is that they're trying to make these franchises, they're no longer the truth that they used to embody when the filmmakers first were making them. Because they didn't know. Star Wars wasn't a billion-dollar franchise when George Lucas made the movie. He thought it was going to fail. He went to Hawaii and hung out on the beach with Spielberg.
Right, so
and
that
when he found out it was a big hit, no one was more surprised than George Lucas. Remember, Star Wars only opened in 38 theaters on May 25th. 20th Century Fox had no idea. They didn't even know.
Right.
They gave it a perfunctory release, and when it became this giant hit, no one was more surprised than 20th Century Fox.
Right.
No one.
Right. Nope, you're exactly right. So, anyway.
And now, we bought this franchise for $4 billion. Goddamn better well perform for us.
Well, yeah. I mean, at that point, you're talking some big money. Absolutely. So, that being said, let's move along to our fourth letter for the day. This is from Pasty Coppertop, who, as you know, has written into your Robservation show time and again, and usually comes and Pasty almost always comes up with some good takes, and this is no exception. So here we go. Short and sweet is the headline. Hey guys, love the Road Trippin' podcast each morning. It's a great thing to listen to each day while I'm on the road. There is so much I want to say regarding your last couple of shows, but I'll try to keep it quick and settle on one point. I just want to see good stuff. I don't want to not like things. I would like to see studios take chances and throw away their pride and use the massive library of ideas, hundreds of Star Wars and Star Trek books, and quit trying to shoehorn stupid modern-day political messages where they don't belong. Star Wars novels have an edge to them that would be a little dark for Disney, but would be great as ideas for shows or films. The Han Solo trilogy of books could have been great for the Solo movie. Maybe they can use the Lando trilogy for his movie. The whole Republic Commando series was awesome. Dark, gritty, with characters you root for and you dislike. Like you said, it was Star Wars. And as I've said before, I have so much in my head, but I can't always articulate it well on the keyboard. Maybe I'll talk to you this weekend. Keep up the good work, boys. Kevin. So thank you very much, Pasty Coppertop. We sure appreciate that. And I think that he reiterates the point you were just making, Rob, about Star Wars and the fact that, there's supposed to be an edge to it. So.
Yeah, it is. And, by definition, Disney cannot like we talked about, because of what they are, what their corporate interests, what their branding is, their wars have to be palatable to kids. You know, I mean, and by doing that, you know, you're robbing. I mean, I think that if it wasn't Disney, if it was HBO Max, Star Wars would be a much more lucrative brand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Even I mean, people say, "What do you mean, Rob? It's already lucrative." I'm like, yeah, you know what though? What it's not doing is Star Wars has been disappointing many people. Right. And it's been, you know, it's Star Wars Empire, and I guess to a certain extent Jedi. I mean, you and I feel differently, but Star Wars was never something that people looked at as disappointing.
Right.
Well, now it has been. Star Wars is disappointing. Star Wars is like, it's now a franchise that should be better than it is. And it's not. We watch it, and hope springs eternal, Mike. But then you watch it, and you're like, that should have been better. Like, I have to say, Obi-Wan is a disappointment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I like it. It's fine. But it's middle of the road writing. I'm actually shocked at the writing on the show. And I think it was, you know, that Kathleen Kennedy even said it was, I think she was doing an interview where she said it was just too dark. We had to rewrite the scripts and lighten it up. I'm like, too dark for what? What does that mean?
Right.
What's too dark? What do you mean by that?
Well, but you know, when your corporate leadership, whether it's your Lucasfilm's corporate leadership and Kathleen Kennedy or your Disney corporate leadership and whoever is saying that the brand is, or that these stories are too dark, and yet your brand is really, these are supposed to be war stories, just by virtue of the title, you know, you probably have a conflicted understanding of the values that ought to be driving everything about the show.
Yep.
So, you know, there are plenty of opportunities to make new brands and tell new stories. I mean, and it's not like Disney can't go dark. I mean, I don't know if you've seen the meme out there, Rob, of the still frame from the animated Beauty and the Beast, where the villagers storm the Beast castle, and they show that bureau hiding around the corner with the big old club, getting ready to knock that piss out of some out of some villager or whatever. It's pretty hilarious. But I mean, you know, they can go dark if they need to.
Oh yeah.
But you're exactly right. If you take a look at how Disney handled the Tarzan story, for example, and you read the Edgar Rice Burroughs books, you realize that there are a number of similarities, but they don't go nearly as visceral as Burroughs did in those novels. And if you read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and you understand where Jules Verne was going with that, you can appreciate the original 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, because who doesn't like watching James Mason and Kirk Douglas fight a giant squid? But there's so much more to those stories than what Disney put on screen.
You look back at 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, that's a very adult movie.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely, it was an adult movie. Yeah.
Even though Kirk Douglas sings with the seal, I mean, it's still, you know, and it's too bad because, again, part of what's happened is we've infantilized children.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's what's really interesting is, on one hand, the Bart Simpson effect. We've made all these kids in these kid shows cooler than their parents.
Right.
You know, they know more than the parents do. Whereas when I was growing up, you know, Leave It to Beaver always made a mistake, and it was always for June and Ward to come in and offer sage-like advice and say, well, you've learned something. And parents always had the last word. And not anymore. You know, since Bart Simpson, come on, man, you know, whatever. It's Bart Simpson smarter than his parents.
Mm-hmm.
His parents are large. and the world's changed. And you watch all these kid shows on Nickelodeon or Disney, all the kids were cooler than their parents.
Yeah. Yep.
And you know, that's this idea that kids are special. My child is special because my child is an extension of me.
Right.
And it's really weird, but I think that nowadays the feeling is we have to protect kids. Oh, kids can't walk to school anymore. The world's dangerous. But the crime statistics don't bear that out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so now that's what we've done is we've who's made this safe world for kids at their own expense. Because we have a whole generation of kids that are overly medicated. They're growing up full of anxiety. I mean, hell, they're getting laid less.
Well, there you go. You know, we could do a whole nother hour just talking about how to bring up kids.
I don't even have kids, so what do I know?
As a parent with 4 kids, I've got some opinions.
Yeah.
So,
you have kids that have their interests.
Right.
You've got one kid over in Russia teaching. You've got another kid that's a musical genius.
Yeah.
You have another kid that is now going to be a world-class chef.
Yeah. And one kid who can fix anything. This is what happens if you let your kid really become a true Lego maniac, as he goes into the appliance repair business and is now making thousands of dollars a week fixing appliances for people. It's pretty hilarious. But and Tim isn't in Russia, just for those of you that are wondering. He's actually in Kazakhstan. So just so you know, I don't have family in Russia.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, so just to kind of help clarify that point. Hey, you know what, dude? I'm glad that you aren't in your car, because we're like 40 or 30 minutes over our typical deadline. This has been an extra special edition of Road Trippin', and we should probably go ahead and sign off for the day. I hate to do it because it's so much fun.
Especially because we got 4 letters from our viewers. So, Mike, if people want to write us letters, where can they do so?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because all they have to do is go to the Post-Geek Singularity website, and then there's a big old button right on the homepage that says send a show a letter. You can do that. There's a little drop-down menu. You can click on it, and you drop down to Road Trippin' with Rob or with R&B, and fill out the form and send it to us. And I'm no kidding, I get that email like within minutes. It comes in screaming hot into my in-basket. So,
and Mike, that would be one word: postgeeksingularity.com.
That's right. Very good. Thank you very much for that. Absolutely. Postgeeksingularity.com. We have all kinds of good stuff. I'm posting a bunch of things today, in fact, up to the website. And of course, we're always on social media. You'll find us, and on YouTube. So we've got some more YouTube goodness coming this weekend, I assume, Rob, right? Are you going to...
Yeah, we do.
We're going to do...
By the way, I got to hand it to you, Mike. I would say that the postgeeksingularity.com website is what I would like to call juicy.
Why, thank you. You know...
There's lots of juicy stories and information and fun stuff. I mean, it is a definite rabbit hole to go down, but it is juicy and delicious.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, one of the things that's so much fun about that Post-Geek Singularity website is that fully 50% of the content that is up there comes from imagination connoisseurs. Whether they send us letters or they're posting interesting things online, we want to go ahead and share that. And as a result, unlike most comic book websites or movie websites or things like that, what you're getting on the Post-Geek Singularity is original takes on stuff. You don't necessarily have to agree with all of it, but it's original. It's interesting. Sometimes it's spelled atrociously, but it's really different. It's not like you're going to find an entertainment website with stories about everything from Power Rangers to Sonic 2 reviews to great Asian cinema and J-horror and plenty of Star Trek and Star Wars and Orville and Doctor Who and James Bond. It's fun to curate, it's fun to manage, and I just wish I had more hours in the day and I'd put even more stuff up, because the Imagination Connoisseur community is a great one, and we really love doing this. So thanks to everyone for your support. And thank you, Rob, for your time and giving us an extra half hour over what we usually do for this podcast. It's great.
That was great.
Yep.
And now I'm going to go do a John Campion mailbag.
There we go. Well, you should be in good practice because you've answered 4 letters already.
Well, there you go.
All right, man.
Yes.
Hey, you want to do this again tomorrow? But of course. All right. Very good. Thank you so much, my friend. I'll talk to you then.
Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take it easy. Yep. Bye. Well, that was an extra special edition of the Road Trippin' with R&B podcast. Thanks so much for sticking with us through the whole thing. That was a Road Trippin' episode for Wednesday, June 1st, 2022. Road Trippin' is a production of Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, LLC, and is transmitted throughout the Post-Geek Singularity from our studios in the lost city of Atlantis. We're under that glass dome next to the giant octopus. You'll find Road Trippin' on your favorite podcasting platform too, and on our website, postgeeksingularity.com. If you check around 8 p.m. Central every weekday night, you'll find that I've got a blog post up there with not only the podcast, but a little bit of elaboration from moi. You don't have to read that if you don't want to. You can just listen to the podcast. But, it's always nice to know that people are tuning in. We also post links to our podcast on all of our social media accounts. You'll find the PGS on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, Reddit, Tumblr, and Discord. And you can access our Discord server by going to our website and clicking on any of the links on any of the pages that say, take me to the PGS community online. We even have one of those big buttons on the homepage that will do that for you. Once you get there, you'll find that there are lots of discussion boards with lots of imagination connoisseurs just like you and just like me, all talking about the things that we love, whether it's science fiction, horror, fantasy, or any other kind of genre entertainment or pop culture news item for the day. You can also sign up to get our email newsletter when you come to the website. Be sure to fill out the form and send it in. Our email newsletters are free and opt-in only, which means that you don't get spammed unless you're asking for it. So no bitching about email, all right? Don't want to hear it. Actually, I do want to hear it. If you don't like the emails, let me know. We'll make them better, okay? Also, don't forget you can send us a message through the website. We talked about that a little bit ago here, but there is that big button right on the homepage that says send the show a letter. We'd love to hear from you. As you can tell, Rob and I get a real kick out of hearing from folks that listen to the show, and we appreciate your opinions, and we want to make the show better. We can't do that if we don't hear from you, and we do hope to hear from you soon. In fact, we hope you'll tune in tomorrow when we do another Road Trippin' podcast. I'm your host, Mike Bodden. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.